Let's be real for a second. We spend a lot of money on it. We fought over it in 2020 like it was gold. We argue about whether the flap goes over or under. But have you ever stopped to wonder what happened before the quilted, triple-ply, aloe-infused softness of the modern toilet paper roll? I'm talking about the thousands of years of human history where the bathroom experience was less about comfort and more about survival. Today, we're going on a journey through the ages, from the caveman to the colonist, to see exactly how our ancestors handled their business. Grab a seat, preferably a comfortable one, and let's get into the gritty history of the wipe. Our story begins in the prehistoric era. For the earliest humans, hygiene wasn't about luxury, it was about proximity. If you were an ancient nomad, your bathroom tissue was essentially whatever wasn't poisonous and was within arm's reach of your squatting spot. This was the true nature's choice era. In lush, tropical environments, broad leaves were the gold standard. However, this required a level of botanical knowledge that most of us lack today. One wrong move with a piece of prehistoric poison ivy and your afternoon goes from relieved to a full-blown medical emergency involving parts of your body that should never, ever be itchy. In more arid regions, or during the ice ages, leaves weren't always an option. This led to the use of scraping materials. If you lived by the sea, you used mussel shells or oyster shells. Yes, you heard that right. Hard, sharp, calcified edges. It wasn't really wiping, it was more like scraping. It's hard to imagine the toughness required to start your day with a seashell, but for thousands of years, that was the coastal reality. In the desert, options were even slimmer, leading people to use handfuls of sand or smooth stones. It sounds primitive, but it set the stage for how civilizations would eventually organize their bathrooms. As we move into the Bronze and Iron Ages, humans began to get a bit more organized. In ancient Greece, we see the first dedicated tools. Archaeologists have excavated ancient latrine pits and found small, circular, or oval ceramic pieces known as Pessoi. These weren't just random shards, they were pieces of pottery that had been smoothed down at the edges to prevent, well, as much damage as possible. There is even a famous Greek proverb that states, 3 stones are enough to wipe. The Greeks were so fond of this method that they sometimes used pottery shards with the names of their enemies written on them. If you hated a local politician, you could literally use his name to clean up your mess. Then came the Roman Empire, and with it, the first real attempt at mass-produced hygiene. The Romans gave us incredible roads and waterproof concrete, but they also gave us the sponge on a stick. Imagine a public latrine in Rome, a long marble bench with holes carved in it, sitting right next to 20 other citizens. There are no stalls and no privacy. When you were finished, you reached for a natural sea sponge tied to the end of a long wooden stick. But here's the kicker. You didn't throw it away, you rinsed it in a bucket of salt water or vinegar that sat at your feet, and then you left it in the bucket for the next guy to use. This is widely believed to be the origin of the phrase, getting the short end of the stick. If you weren't careful and grabbed the wrong end in a dark latrine, your day just took a very dark turn. As the Roman Empire fell and the Middle Ages began, hygiene took a turn toward the local and the practical. In the Viking world, warriors had a surprisingly soft approach. Their go-to material was sheep's wool. On the surface, this sounds like a luxury upgrade. It's absorbent, it's soft, and it's essentially the 10th century version of premium tissue. However, wool was a valuable resource used for clothing and trade. Because it was so expensive, Viking toilet wool was often washed and reused multiple times. If wool wasn't available, they turned to moss. Moss is actually a top-tier choice because it is naturally antibacterial and holds moisture quite well. In the damp climates of Scandinavia and Britain, a clump of fresh moss was likely the most comfortable thing a human could use for several centuries. By the time we hit the Renaissance and the Tudor era in England, the way you wiped became a status symbol. If you were a peasant, you were still using straw, hay, or old rags, but if you were King Henry VIII, you had the groom of the stool. This was a high-ranking noble whose entire job was to assist the king with a piece of fine linen cloth. While it sounds like a dirty job, it was actually one of the most coveted positions in the palace. Because the groom had the king's ear during his most private moments, he became a powerful political confidant. It just goes to show that in the 1500s, it wasn't about what you knew, but whose royal backside you were cleaning. As we sail across the ocean to colonial America, the materials changed again. In the 18th and 19th centuries, corn was the most abundant crop in the New World. Once the kernels were eaten, the dried corn cob became the primary tool of the American outhouse. Corn cobs were plentiful, they were free, and they were surprisingly effective due to their texture. They remained a staple of rural life for hundreds of years. In fact, they were so popular that even after the first commercial toilet papers were invented, many pioneers refused to switch, seeing bought paper as a frivolous luxury. The transition to paper happened gradually. While China had been using paper for hygiene since the 6th century, the West didn't catch on until the mid-1800s. Before specialized paper existed, Americans used the next best free thing, the Sears Roebuck catalog. People would hang the catalog on a nail in the outhouse, read the advertisements for plows and boots, and then recycle the page. When Sears started using glossy paper in the 1930s, people actually wrote letters to the company to complain. The shiny paper wasn't as absorbent as the old newsprint, and for the American farmer, that was a genuine crisis. The first commercial toilet paper in the U.S. was Joseph Gayety's medicated paper in 1857. It was sold in flat sheets, soaked in aloe, and had his name watermarked on every page. His marketing slogan was, "The greatest necessity of the age." But because people were still using the Sears catalog for free, his business struggled. It wasn't until 1890 that the Scott Paper Company finally put paper on a perforated roll. Even then, society was so modest that people were embarrassed to ask for it by name. It was often sold under street names to avoid the scandal of acknowledging bathroom habits. Perhaps the most shocking part of this timeline is that until 1935, toilet paper wasn't marketed as being soft. It was marketed as splinter-free. Because early paper manufacturing was still a bit rustic, it wasn't uncommon to find small bits of wood embedded in your roll. Northern Tissue was the first to advertise a process that guaranteed no splinters. Just let that sink in. For our grandparents, no splinters in the butt was a major high-tech selling point. We really are living in the golden age of hygiene. Even today, the journey continues. While the West is obsessed with dry paper, much of the world has returned to the ancient wisdom of water. From the bidet in Europe to the bum gun in Thailand, and the high-tech Japanese toilets that play forest sounds and have heated seats, the way we wipe is constantly evolving. The logic is simple. If you got mud on your arm, would you just rub it off with a dry paper towel? No, you'd wash it. We are slowly moving away from the dry era and back toward a more liquid solution. So the next time you're at the grocery store and you see 50 different types of toilet paper, take a second to be truly grateful. We've come a long way from the prehistoric seashell, the Roman communal sponge, the Viking moss, and the colonial corncob. We live in a world where our paper is splinter-free, quilted for our comfort, and doesn't require a noble assistant to help us out. The history of the wipe is the history of human progress. Messy, a little bit weird, but always moving toward a cleaner, softer future. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of hygiene, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments, if you were stranded on a desert island and had to choose one historical method, would you go Team Seashell or Team Moss? Or are you sticking with the corncob? Stay clean, everyone.